Did you know that out of the 382 Brainrots that Sammy's added to the game, that only 23 of them have been buffed? Because Sammy has barely buffed any of the Brainrots, that means that Sammy's going to be buffing even more Brainrots in the future. So today I'm going to be showing you guys what Brainrots are going to be buffed and some that I think that have a very good chance of being buffed. I'm also going to be talking about some Brainrots that people lie about. So watch the full video so that you don't get scammed. So I'm going to be separating each Brainrot by the machine you get them from. The first machine that we're going to be going over is the craft machine. So the first Brainrot we're going to be talking about is the Anapali Babel. This Brainrot was actually in two machines. I think that it was in the craft machine and I think that it was in the dealer machine as well. We don't know how many of these exist, but the fact that it was in two machines makes it probably a lot less rare. There's probably a lot more exists of it. I hardly ever see this thing though, so there is a decent chance it'll get buffed, but I do think it's low. The next Brainrot is actually one that I own, so I'm going to try not to be biased, and it's the Trenso Turbo 4000. This Brainrot needed two Trenso Turbo 3000 and two Giraffa Celestres, which 6 months ago, those Brainrots are actually pretty hard to get. We don't know how many of these exist, but I hardly ever see these, and there's a lot of rumors of people saying that there's not that many of them that exist. Some people say that there's only 1,000 of them, but a lot of people just lie because they want to trade theirs away. But I do think that this one could be buffed because it does have a really good design. So if the exist counts of the Trenso are low, I think that this has a high chance of getting buffed. The next one is actually another one that I own, and it's the La Sahor combination. But unlike the Trenso, I do not think that this one is going to get buffed. For this craft, you actually needed a Gripus to make it, and the Gripus was so hard to get. It was such a rare spawn because the luck was not as good as it is now 6 months ago. But because it was a secret, everybody wanted one of these, there was still 300,000 of them crafted. I do have a tiny bit of hope of it getting buffed because it only makes 2 million, which is really bad for how rare it is. Maybe he'll buff it to like 10 million or something if he does. Also, another thing is that some people actually fake the exist count. So if the exist count is fake, then I do see this one getting buffed. But if it's real, I think that this has a very low chance of getting buffed. The next Brainrot is 100% going to be buffed because Sammy actually said it was going to be buffed, and it's the Rhino Helicopterino. There's really not too much to say. Sammy ran a poll and this one actually won the poll, so we should be seeing it get buffed soon. I think that this next Brainrot also has a pretty high chance of getting buffed because it reminds me a lot of the Rhino, and that Brainrot is the Gorillo Subwoofero. Bro, these names are ridiculous. This Brainrot was actually harder to get from the craft than the Rhino was, and in my opinion, it has a way cooler design. Usually when Sammy buffs the Brainrots, he actually makes the Brainrot bigger, so imagine how cool this gorilla will look if it actually looks like a big gorilla. We don't actually know how many of these exist. If the exist count is low, I think that this definitely has a very high chance of getting buffed. Next is the okay, I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that, but it's this phone Brainrot. If you look at the phone he's on, he's actually about to hop on StealABrainrot. And guys, this Brainrot only has 50,000 of them that exist, which makes it one of the rarest in the game. It was a really difficult craft at the time. You needed 2 Legrandes, and Legrandes were not easy to come around. I actually think that this phone has a huge chance of getting buffed, and it might get buffed to something like 75 million. One of the toughest Brainrots in the game is the Tralalalalaladon. It has one of the best designs in the game, and you actually needed a Nuclearo to make it. And again, all these Brainrots that are easy to get now were so difficult back then. There's actually less than 60,000 of these, and the design is so clean. I also think that this one has a high chance of getting buffed. Next up is a Brainrot that I'd actually be surprised if it didn't get buffed, and you might actually own it, and it's the Lost Tacoritos. The Lost Tacoritos were one of the hardest crafts in the game. Not only did you need to craft the taco bike, which in itself was already a hard craft, but you needed to do that twice. Less than 60,000 of these exist in the game, and I think that it has a very high chance of getting buffed. But a Brainrot I don't think is gonna get buffed, even though some people think it is the Lost Sis. So to make the Lost Sis, you needed a Lost combination, and the Lost combination was pretty hard to get, but you only needed one, and the rest of the Brainrots were really easy. The only way I see this getting buffed is if Sammy makes it go from 17 million to 25 million or something. It won't be that crazy of a buff if he does. And finally, the last 2 Brainrots from the craft machine are the Lost Bros and the Lost Primos. So for the Lost Bros, you needed 1 Legrande to make them, and the Lost Primos, you needed the Lost Bros to make them. But believe it or not, there's more than 100,000 Lost Primos in the game, which means that there's probably a whole bunch of Lost Bros in the game as well. They also already have a decently high base, so I don't see Sammy buffing these ones. Okay, now we're gonna be moving on to the next machine, which is the OG craft machine. And the first Brainrot we're talking about is the Lost Hotspot Cetos. The Lost Hotspot Cetos have 223,000 150,000 exists, which is a lot. But I actually do think that there's a chance that he buffs it. The Las Haspacitos only make 20 million, which is really low because of the Brainrot inflation. So if he does buff them, I think that it'll be a small buff, something just to make them a little bit more valuable. Now, a lot of people will try to scam you with this next Brainrot. They say that it's very rare because you can't get it anymore, and that's just not true. The Brainrot that I'm talking about is the shovel. There's more than 1 million of them, so there's no way Sammy's gonna buff it. Even if somebody offers you one of the rare ones, like a candy one, which only has 179 existing, I still wouldn't trade anything too good for it because I don't think anyone actually wants to trade for this. Okay, for these Brainrots, I'm actually gonna be grouping them all together because they're all mythics. So firstly, I think that the Toby actually has a very high chance of getting buffed because there's only 50,000 that exist. The only reason I don't think it'll get buffed is because the design is very similar to the
Traco Takachalu della Pelladustus,
and it might be a little bit confusing if he buffs it. Next up is the Gengazelli Trulala, which only has 60,000 exists. I think that this one also has a high chance of getting buffed just because it has such little exists. Also, the design is very unique, and I actually think that it's kind of clean. Now, next up is another one that people think is more valuable than it is, and it's the Avocado Rilla. Unfortunately, Sammy actually brought this back in one of the new machines, and now it has 176,000 exists in the world. So it's still decently rare, but I really don't think that Sammy's gonna buff it. Okay, now we're moving on to the Brainrot Trader, and there's actually a lot of Brainrots in this category. And the first one is actually one that people are not sure is gonna get buffed, and it's the Centrusi Nuculusi. Sammy actually talked about buffing this one, but it lost the poll. So since it lost, it makes people think that it's not gonna get buffed, but I still think it does have a high chance. There's only 52,000 exists, which makes it one of the rarest Brainrots in the game. Next up is the Stapo Lemino, which I actually rarely see. We have no idea how many of these exist. It's only a mythic. The Brainrot Trader was actually the Brainrot dealer before, and you could basically get these for free from the Brainrot dealer. So there's probably a lot of them that exist, unfortunately. So I think that this one has a low chance of getting buffed. Next is the Clicorino Crabbo, which I actually think might get buffed. Something that I've noticed about the crafts is that people don't really craft the legendaries or the mythics, which makes them more rare in the future. And even if they do craft them, a lot of people just sell them. I'm not sure how many exist, but if it's less than 30,000, this might actually become one of the best Brainrots in the game. Okay, this next Brainrot might get buffed, but it's for a weird reason. The Sigma Girl is a legendary, which means that not that many people crafted it. We all know that Rusty Nickel loves the Sigma Boy, so there might be a time where Sammy asks him to buff it, or it just might get buffed because it's only a legendary. I don't know how many of these exist. So you guys know how I said that the mythics and the legendaries typically weren't crafted? That's not really true for the epics and commons because these were dirt cheap to make. So many people made them. There's probably more than like 500,000 of these in the game. So I really don't think that this one's gonna get buffed. Do not trade for this. Next up is the Pichonetta Machina. Please, Sammy, make these easier to pronounce. I actually think that this one has a pretty high chance of getting buffed. It was one of the harder Brainrots, and a lot of people probably didn't want to waste their time with it. I think that if this has less than 70,000 exist, that it's most likely going to get buffed. And finally, the last trader Brainrot is the No La Policia. I know that a lot of people crafted this Brainrot, and I'm not sure how many people kept them, but guys, just look at these little things. They do not have the aura to be buffed. They're too similar to the other hotspot Cetos, so I don't think that these are going to get buffed. The next Brainrots are from the Valentine Craft, or the Valentine Fuse, whatever it's called. The first one is the Loving Rose. So a lot of people think that only 30,000 of these exist, but that was actually an old screenshot. There's actually more than 98,000 of these in the game. So if somebody tells you that there's only 30,000, do not believe them. I don't think that the Loving Rose is gonna get buffed because it already has a really high base at 32 million, and it almost has 100,000 exists in the game. It just doesn't seem like one that's gonna get buffed. And the last one that we got is the Love Love Bear. The Love Love Bear was already buffed actually, and it already makes 225 million. The demand on these things is going really crazy. It's going really up, but I don't think that that's gonna make it get buffed. So I think that this one's very unlikely to get buffed again. And finally, we have the Easter Brainrots, and the first one that we have is the Quackini Snackini. This one already has a very high base, but ooh, good voice crack. But there's only 5,000 of them in the game. That is such a low amount, guys. 5,000 Brainrots in the game. So I do think that this can get buffed. And if it does, it'll probably get buffed to like 150 million or something. The chance of it getting buffed isn't too high just because the base is so high. So if it does get buffed, it'll probably get buffed in a couple months from now, not anytime soon.